Hi learners. One or two students asked me to talk about the Cynefin model and what that might mean, and to give you some examples drawing from some experiences I've had working with the model. Cynefin grew out of the IBM thinking laboratory, and the fellow who's done the most work is David Snowden. And it's grown to be kind of a cottage industry through the United States, Europe, and most of the world. It basically is a way for people to address things that happen in an irrational world. If you accept the premise that the world is irrational, you'll find Cynefin to be a pretty handy way of parsing out the different kinds of things that you're observing within an education context. So when we look at Cynefin, there are different kinds of categories, but let me just say that one of the purposes is that you can explain, you can look at things that are knowing how and things that are knowing that. And the how is sometimes much different than the that. And so let me just explain that by looking at a couple of categories. The four categories that I deal with, there are 5 Cynefin categories, by the way, but the 4 that are referred to most often are simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. The fifth one, the 5th category, of course, is disorder, and we don't run into that one a whole lot, and we don't necessarily always run into the chaotic category either, but simple happens when the relationship between cause and effect is really well known and everybody understands it. And so within that context, the goal is to sense what's going on, to categorize it, and to respond. And this is a fairly routine kind of built-in mechanism that most of us have. So it's really the domain of where best practices can be imported from other places and used, provided that they're reasonably simple, of course. Complicated, on the other hand, is when the relationship between cause and effect isn't really clear. And this is where you call in experts to sometimes help you figure that out, consultants, researchers within an organization. When you're done with this class, you, for instance, would be an example of an expert that could come in and really work through the sense, the analyzing, and the responding. Now notice that here you're analyzing what's going on. You're not just categorizing like you were in the simple domain. So in the complicated domain then, what is unknown is really known. So that's the focus, is trying to look at what you don't know and why you don't know it, looking at options that are possible, good practice as opposed to best practice. And good practice means that, there's some leeway there, and it isn't an iconic kind of process or practice, rather, that you would find in the simple domain. And finally, complex is when the relationship between cause and effect is really only known after the event is over with. So it isn't necessarily a priori knowledge. So the emphasis is to probe, to sense what's going on, and then to respond. So, and in the complex domain, right answers can't be easily ferreted out. And so this is really where you see new practices emerge to meet these types of needs. And finally, chaotic is when there's no relationship between cause and effect, or no known relationship at the systems level. And so there, what we see is the need to act, to test that out, to sense whether that act was reasonable within the domain, and then to respond. So I'm going to give you just some quick leadership challenges that go along with these domains, and then I'll turn back to the discussion board and read what you have to say about that. In the simple domain, is where leadership would tend to oversimplify sometimes, and also probably become quite complacent because cause and effect is known. It's a little bit ho-hum. Why spend any time really mulling over options? And as we find sometimes in the simple domain, things that may be simple to you may not be simple to me. Things that may be simple to a leader may not be very simple to the rank and file. In the complicated domain, then, again, this is the domain, it's sometimes called the expert domain. One of the challenges that you can have is paralysis by analysis, and that is an over-processing of information and data. And you can also form kind of a dependent relationship upon your researcher, and that person may find themselves spoon-feeding you different things that they want you to think. And so that's one of the challenges. In the complex domain then would be implementing new interventions. In that kind of domain, you're really not talking about top-down strategies working very well. That would be the people who are driving the leadership at the institution telling people what to do. Because again, this is very much an emergent kind of domain, and people really have to figure out probably for themselves what works best. So it really requires this kind of reciprocal communication. And finally, the chaotic domain, again, where there's no known cause of relationship, there is no real manageable pattern that's out there. It's at that stage that a leader really needs to kind of think about what steps that they would be taking next, what kinds of data would be helpful, what kinds of information, and knowing that in this domain that it's not very clear sometimes what's happening. So, just a brief explanation of Cynefin. I'm rather taken by the model. I use it quite a bit, and even my own thinking sometimes when groups are together and what people are entertaining. I would wind up by saying that the World Cafe, or Having Conversations That Matter, is another wonderful resource that's not Cynefin based, but between the two, categorizing what's going on with kind of a cycle of having conversations that matter could pay dividends in your work. So thank you very much, and I'll turn back to the discussion board and watch what you think. Thank you.